All right, welcome into the EMAW Online NCAA Tournament podcast as Alec and I get ready to, for the next however long, discuss K-State's draw in the NCAA Tournament, some of the other things that come with it. We also have, I guess, a little bit to clean up from what took place this weekend in the Big 12 Tournament. But finally, it's been a 4-year wait for K-State fans to see the Wildcats back in the NCAA Tournament. 2019 was the last trip. The Wildcats are back, and they will be doing so as a number 3 seed. They get shipped off to Greensboro, where they will take on Montana State, Big Sky champs. And then the winner of that game will get the winner of Kentucky and Providence. So if you've been listening however long, you know that when we start talking NCAA tournament, Kentucky was one of those teams that there was some slight concern over because we know that K-State has struggled inside. It's the biggest weakness that this team has. One of the things that hurt them against TCU was they got killed on the offensive boards again. And Kentucky, I'm not sure if anybody out there is aware of this, got a pretty good big man inside in Oscar Tshiebwe. So the Wildcats will have their hands full, regardless of it, if it's Kentucky or Providence, if they make it to the second round. But the real key for K-State is going to be just securing a win in the first round, because that's been something that's been kind of difficult for the Wildcats to do over the last however many trips it's been to the NCAA tournament. If you go through and look at how it's played out, the last time K-State outside of 2018, so they made it to the Elite Eight in 2018, but in the last however many trips, you start in 2013, they lost in the first round to LaSalle in Kansas City. Then the following year, they lost in the first round in St. Louis to Kentucky. That was the 8-9 game. And then props to the Wildcats that moved on in that. Kentucky for ousting Wichita State. Much appreciated there in the next round, and making Shocker fans to this day still cry about Kentucky being an 8 seed, and that's who they had to play as a 1. It's a whole big deal. It's unnecessary. The better team won that day. Then K-State went on their little hiatus. They didn't play in the NCAA tournament again until the 16-17 season. And in the 2017 season, they win the first 4 game against Wake Forest. They get bounced in the first round. Then they may have still been calling it the second round, but theoretically the first round. What we know is the first round right now against Cincinnati, and that game was in Sacramento. The following year is when they are able to make it to the Elite Eight. They took down Creighton, an impressive round 1 win, and they beat the 16 seed, beat Kentucky, lost to Loyola. And then the following year, it was another first round upset in which they lost to UC Irvine as one of the top 4 seeds in their region out in San Jose. So the Wildcats going to need to prove themselves by just taking care of business with Montana State. And then if anything comes at them from that point forward, then they'll deal with it at that point. But the Wildcats, we know what the draw stands at this point. Purdue's the 1 seed in their region. Marquette's the 2. The Wildcats go to Greensboro, and it's not like the most attractive grouping of teams that are going to be in Greensboro. If you look at the other region that is paired up with them in Greensboro, Iowa State's going to be there as well. So if you're a Wildcat that makes your way to Greensboro, you're going to get to sit through some Iowa State game action. I guess pull for whoever Iowa State is playing against, because that's going to be a brutal watch to see Iowa State again. Very, I don't know, offensively challenged at times unless Gabe Kalsher goes off. So that's kind of set the stage for what is going to be coming up and what we have to talk about here. But Alec, I'll start with you on this. What were your initial thoughts on where K-State ended up seed-wise, the draw, and then obviously location that gets mixed into all of this as well?
Yeah, first of all, obviously getting to the NCAA tournament in your first year under a head coach is obviously a major accomplishment, like you kind of outlined there. It's a program that hasn't made it to the NCAA tournament in the last 4 years, and obviously the COVID year is kind of mixed in there in 2020 as well. But to make it under this season, and we don't need to continue to tell the same story as we've been telling for, I feel like, however many weeks now. But to make it is obviously awesome. It's an accomplishment anytime any program makes it. And if you don't believe that, just look at North Carolina, because they didn't make it this year. And quite frankly, I think that's hilarious. They're the first preseason number 1 team to not make the NCAA tournament since it's expanded. I, for one, did not think North Carolina was deserving of the preseason number 1. Did I think they'd miss a tournament? No. Just wanted to slide that in there real quick. So shout out to you if you're a Tar Heel fan watching this. I'm happy your program didn't make it, because you guys are terrible. But back to K-State. Yeah, like I don't know much about Montana State, to be honest with you. I don't know anything about Montana State. Haven't had a chance to do any homework on the Bobcats yet. Certainly, it's an interesting region when you look at who's in it and maybe who people would pick to have success in this region. Purdue obviously is the number one seed in the East region, led by Zach Edey. Like I said, number one seed. Duke is one of the hottest teams in the country. They've got a lot of size, a lot of talent, led by Kyle Filipkowski. Derek Lively is a potential number one, or not number one. Derek Lively is a potential lottery pick. Drake Whitehead as well is a good player. And then Tyrese Proctor is a kid who reclassed up, and he's started to play pretty well since Jimmy Roach got hurt and then was returned to the lineup. They did some different things. John Shire did. Tennessee, unfortunately, they've had some bad injury luck of late, but not the most pleasantly to watch team, I guess you could say. They struggle a lot offensively. And then Kentucky, like their story of this season, I think, Mason, is fascinating. They were kind of trending towards being out of the NCAA tournament at one point this season, but I think John Calipari did a really, really good job of being able to right this ship come mid-January, come February, to get this team back into the NCAA tournament, get them to a 6 seed. They don't have a ton of depth. They play 5-6 guys. Credit Calipari again, though, for recognizing those are his best 5 players and sticking with it. That takes a lot of understanding. Providence is a team that kind of limps into the NCAA tournament, but everyone knows how good of a coach Ed Cooley is up there in Connecticut. And I think at the bottom half, like there's some interesting
geography lesson, Rhode Island.
Sorry. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't even know how we're getting to Greensboro. Do you drive through like Colorado to get there?
Well, more geography going to be needed for Alec here. I was looking at the map and the route that a drive to Greensboro, North Carolina would entail. I think it involves going through Kentucky. Anybody that wants to go through the Bluegrass State, that's probably on the agenda if you're going to Greensboro from Kansas.
But even at the bottom half of it, excluding Kansas State, Montana State, because we'll talk a lot about that game. Michigan State, obviously, January, February, Izzo, not a huge believer in that. Haven't been a huge believer in this Michigan State team for much of the season, but they've kind of started to play well as they enter the March Madness tournament. USC is a team that I really like. Vince the Prince, Finzi Wachuku, 5-star center. Boogie Ellis is really good. Drew Peterson's kind of been battling some back stiffness for the Trojans, but he's another good player out there in Los Angeles. And then Marquette is coming in really, really hot. Tyler Kolek is, in my opinion, one of the 2-3 best point guards in the entire country. So there's certainly some interesting teams in this region. And we can kind of focus in here on K-State's little pod of Kentucky and Providence, which is opposite K-State and Montana State. Again, don't know much about Montana State at this point. When you kind of look at where they're at in KenPom and different things like that, 110th in KenPom. Their defensive efficiency numbers are actually pretty good for a program that plays in the Big Sky. They're 75th or 73rd, I guess you should say, in adjusted defensive efficiency by KenPom. So that's certainly something that is inspiring, I guess, if you're a Bobcat fan in this matchup. But if you're a K-State fan, understand that it maybe isn't going to be as easy to score against Montana State as it was against some of the low major programs that you played early in the season.
Yeah, I mean, that's I think early on, the one thing that sticks out is it doesn't seem like Montana State is the I don't know, the most on top of it when it comes to their offense, or at least recently. They've had some high scoring games, but they're also capable of keeping things a little bit lower. But most of their games that recently have played out, if you averaged them probably into the 70s, they dominated the Big Sky. They only end up with 3 conference losses this season. So they're going to be enough of a challenge as a 14 seed, but there really is no reason to go into a game as the 3 seed thinking that the 14 seed should be some monumental task for you to get over the hump and face. So, I mean, 25-9, solid record for them. Of losses though that they had this season, Montana State opened up with a loss to Grand Canyon, also a tournament team, since they won the WAC tournament last night. They lost to Oregon by 30. Other losses to UNC Greensboro, Quinnipiac, and Middle Tennessee. And then they lost by 21 to Arizona. And then you get into their conference play and the losses that they suffered there. So not much you can gain from looking at their schedule. And again, the level of competition that they play in the Big Sky fairly low. So also in that, you don't really know what to take away from what do the numbers actually mean for Montana State. But, the things to watch for in this game, Montana State defensively, they force about 20 turnovers, or 20% of the time they'll force a turnover. That's a pretty good number. That's top 75 in the country, according to KenPom. So that's a good number for them to watch for. And with K-State, like, we know that they turn the ball over quite a bit. So that's probably one area that could give Montana State a little bit of a leg up. But they also, I don't know. I think looking at this, like, we just know what K-State's going to have to do, and that's try to manage the ball as well as you can. You're going to have the two best players on the floor for sure. And realistically, you should probably have, the third best player on the floor as well, and just kind of keep extending down that list. So, like anything, and it's simple to say when we don't know a ton about the opponent at this point in time, but when you're the 3 seed taking on a 14 seed, just don't give them any reason or any chance to start to beat you, like by beating yourself. And I think that's what K-State's main focus is going to have to be. Names to know for Montana State. They immediately talked about this when the brackets were unveiled. They have 3 guys that average in double figures. Raekwon Battle is their guard. He averages about 17.5 points per game. So he's going to be the key figure to watch. And then they have a couple of guys that play inside, a 6'9" forward and then a 6'8" forward, that are both averaging in double figures throughout the season. So that's something to keep an eye on. Statistically, like average-wise, both teams are pretty darn similar. Both are just under 34% from 3, which is an important number to take note of, because we know that K-State has struggled and they've been beaten by the 3 ball over the last couple of weeks. The other thing that kind of stands out, we know K-State turns it over a lot. Montana State doesn't. They're under 12 turnovers a game. So the Wildcats are really going to have to rely on just playing good, solid defense and getting the board for themselves against Montana State, who, if you want some good news, Montana State is one of the worst offensive rebounding teams in the country. So K-State doesn't have to worry too severely about that in this first round matchup. Whereas some of these mid-major teams and lower, they tend to have just kind of that random big guy inside that can suck in a bunch of rebounds. Montana State theoretically shouldn't have that, as long as K-State's able to go out there and do their own thing and just kind of lock it down enough.
Yeah, and I think highlighting Raekwon Battle is important. Like you said, he's someone who averages about 17 minutes a game. He's a really good scorer. He takes about 35% of this team's shots. So that's someone that you really need to defend and defend at a high level. I think it'll be interesting to see who Kansas State kind of puts on him and who they switch on to him, because obviously K-State's defense that does switch a lot. They do throw different things at different opponents. And I think one thing that works really well for Kansas State at this point is, that no middle defense is really kind of exclusive right now to the Big 12. Not a lot of conferences run it. Not a lot of schools and other leagues run the no middle defense. So I think that can kind of become an advantage for Big 12 teams at this time of the season, is that opponents just don't know how to attack it because they don't see it very often. Certainly it's not the most difficult thing to crack. Once you kind of get the hang of it and you want to get baseline, you want to try and find a way to get the ball in the middle of the floor if you can. But the goal of the no middle defense, obviously, is to keep the ball out of the middle. But if you can get it in there, you're doing all right as an offensive team. But all things considered, I think Kansas State, like you said, this is a team that the Wildcats need to beat. Like you said, 14 seed. It's a program that you have to beat, right? Like you can't take a loss to a 14 seed in the NCAA tournament. It's just not something you should do, right? It's one thing to lose in the round of 32 to a team that's similarly seeded as you are, but you certainly don't want to get upset like that in the round of 64. Looking ahead, though, Mason, I do think that the matchup between Kentucky in the second round is an interesting one. The Wildcats are obviously a talented team, and they certainly present things that are concerning, I guess you could say, for this Kansas State team as a matchup. And we can dive into Providence a little bit here too as well. But
I know it sounds like you've already written Providence off and you're expecting it to be Kentucky and K-State in the second round.
No, I do like this Providence team. I really do like some of the pieces that they have. I just feel like focusing on the 6th seed is a little bit better. I mean, Bryce Hopkins is a stud for the Friars. I just don't know what state that the university's in.
You know, one of the things that I look at with Kentucky, I mean, we've talked about Sheway before we even knew that Kentucky was going to be a possibility. We just always kind of assumed that the way the bracket might work out, Kentucky would be involved there. In addition to Sheway, like we know that Kentucky has had their ups and downs this season, and they've kind of rotated. Which guard I guess is kind of getting the headlines for them. Casey Wallace at times has been kind of the front runner there. Severe Wheeler. It was Wheeler that was when he left the starting lineup, they kind of started to turn things around again. So Kentucky, I mean, they've got the guards and they're a pretty balanced team. Like Sheway isn't far and away dominating things for them this year like he has in the past. I mean, he's still 17 or just under 17 points a game, but 13 rebounds a game. But everybody else is kind of closer to the pack with him. They got 4 guys. They're going to be in double figures. They're going to shoot the ball pretty well if you give a couple of the guys a chance. So, I mean, Kentucky would be a very tricky matchup for K-State. But as I look around, you see who the other 6 seeds are. The K-State couldn't have played 2 of them because the 2 other 6 seeds were Iowa State and TCU. And we know how that went. They split in the season with those 2 teams, and then TCU got the second win in the Big 12 tournament on Thursday. But the other one was Creighton, and that's who Baylor's possible second-round matchup would be. For me, I mean, it's tough, but I think I would rather see K-State play Kentucky than, if I'm on the Baylor side and you're getting Creighton. I would rather have Kentucky than Creighton. Do you think that's crazy or not?
I think that Creighton probably has a higher ceiling from what we've seen of the 2 teams this year between Kentucky and Creighton. I think that that's probably hard to argue, but I guess I would probably agree with that because I feel like Creighton, offensively speaking, is really good. They're potentially really explosive on the offensive side, and when they've had Ryan Kalkbrenner, they've been pretty good. So I can kind of see where you're coming from with that kind of opinion. I guess the one counter is, I guess never mind. I was going to say Kentucky has some guys who have extended tournament experience, but they don't.
Yeah, I mean they've been to a tournament.
They've been to a lot of tournaments. They just haven't gone far.
They haven't done much in those tournaments. So that is the one other thing. Scott points out on the YouTube stream that K-State has the top KenPom defense in this region. That is correct. They do have the top KenPom defense in the region. Because as we mentioned, the teams immediately around them, Marquette is the 2 seed in this region. And then the number 1 is Purdue. Tennessee is the 4 seed. And then Duke is the 5. There are some fascinating teams in the mix here in this region. When you look around at like Memphis is an 8 on the high end, they have guys that can help Memphis compete with about anybody. The problem is Memphis is just one of those teams that they're not going to be able to produce at their high level every single night out. They were at that high level today when they beat Houston in the American Athletic Conference tournament championship game. So that could be interesting against Purdue, but Purdue's going to have obviously the size advantage inside, and it would just come down to how hot can Kendrick Davis be.
If you were to rank the point guards in K-State's region, where does Marquise Noel rank? Because I think I'd have him 3rd.
It's a good question.
Which is astonishing that you would put him 3rd, given that some people have had him a 2nd team or 3rd team All-American this season. But I think he's certainly behind Tyler Kolek at Marquette. I mean, he was the Big East Player of the Year. He's averaging about 8 points or 18 points a game. Good rebounder, good assist guy, not as far along in the assist numbers as Noel is, but maybe a little bit more consistent, maybe not as erratic as Noel is. And then obviously Kendrick Davis at Memphis is like awesome. I mean, he's probably been the best transfer in the country this season.
I would still lean towards I think Noel's probably number 2 in this thing behind Kolek of Marquette. because, I mean, he won the Big East Player of the Year, and then he totally backed it up in the conference tournament. So everything about what he has done, I think, is impressive. But I would still give Marquise Noel the nod as being the second best in here, because we know that Noel can score. He does that. He's carrying quite the load, but also the way he's going to dish the ball out. And, I think because it's K-State that we see on a daily basis, and that's what we're closest to. We're going to be harsher critics or a little bit more down at times on some of the things that go wrong than what we should be. Because I think Marquise Noel is in that category of because he's the face of the team and because he carries the load so often that when things go wrong, and there have been more things to go wrong over the last couple of weeks than at any point in the season, you look around and you kind of point fingers and he gets a lion's share of the blame. I still think Marquise Noel is probably the second best point guard in this region based off of what he can do for his team and what he has done for his team this season.
I mean, you certainly can't go wrong with any of the three. I do think there's I actually do think there's some good guards in this entire region. At Purdue, Braden Smith is a freshman. He's not going to wow you with anything, but he is very steady. Doesn't make a lot of mistakes. He's had some weak spots and moments at the end of games this season, but he's been really good this year for Purdue. I like Jeremy Roach a lot at Duke. Tyrese Proctor hasn't shot it as well as people thought he would as a freshman, but both of those guys are a pretty good duo as well. And then at Michigan State, right? Like we've got Tyson Walker, we've got AJ Hoggard. That's a pretty good backcourt duo. At USC, you've got Boogie Ellis, who is an explosive scorer. There's a lot of good guards in this region, which is kind of weird because there's not a lot of good guards in college basketball this year.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and I think this is. I mean, I think this is a good region. I think anybody in here looks at it and probably says, "Okay, we got a favorable draw from the standpoint of who we could play and who we could match up against." I mean, you look around at some of the other places. I can guarantee you that if you gave Purdue the choice, they would probably rather have. I mean, the only other one that you can make the case that would maybe be better is Iowa and Auburn. Which Houston is going to get. But like, you don't want Kansas's draw with Arkansas and Illinois. And honestly, like Alabama getting Maryland and West Virginia, I think that they would be more concerned about that than if they had like Memphis and Florida Atlantic, like what Purdue is possibly going to get. So I think you see that. And then you look around, and if the 2 and 3 are Marquette and K-State, two schools that are great teams this year, but unproven. And you feel like you're going to be able to have a little bit of a leg up if you have the talent advantage, like Kentucky as a 6 seed probably would. Obviously, Purdue as a number 1 would have. And then you keep going down the list, like number 4, Tennessee, they're banged up. Like they're and they're terrible offensively. Like they were pretty bad before Ziegler went out. They're even worse now.
Somehow they hung with Mizzou in the semifinals, which is weird.
I think that probably has a lot to do with Missouri's defense. And then Duke being the 5. Duke's on a heater right now. They're playing really good basketball. But they play in the ACC, which we know is probably the weakest Power 5. Yeah, gauntlet. Probably the weakest Power 5 conference in America. Especially if you just try and consider who's at the top. Like the Pac-12 got less teams in the field than the ACC, but at the top of the ACC, it is far, far weaker. I think I said last night to you and Gabe, like if you took the top 3 or 4 teams in the Pac-12, I would rather have that top 3 or 4 than whatever the ACC could spit out at me.
I think you can put the top 3, 4 of the Pac-12 up against a lot of different leagues and feel good about your chances if you take especially because the top 2 there are so good.
Yeah.
But maybe you don't feel as good about team 3 and team 4, given that that's in terms of the teams that have made the NCAA tournament. Team 3 is USC, team 4 being Arizona State, who's in the playing game. But I feel better about that top 4 than I do about the Big Tens. I mean, I don't even know who the Big Tens 3 and 4 are.
Well, I mean, this weekend certainly clouded it up quite a bit. I think,
behind Alabama, who do you feel great about in the SEC?
Yeah, I mean, they're all good points.
And certainly the Big 12 is up there with obviously Kansas, Texas,
Yeah.
and then you can kind of go through a litany of teams for 3 and 4. But I think you could argue that the Big East has the best top of any conference when you look at the group of teams that they have there with Marquette, Xavier, UConn.
I
The
think
Big
it.
East is deep.
I think it comes down to, are you going off of what they've done or what they can do? And I think that's, where obviously a lot of the breakdown comes when people are filling out a bracket or something in March is, what have you been versus what is your ceiling? And like, that's where K-State might hit some limitations. Like if they play a team that is hitting their ceiling, there is a greater likelihood that that team's ceiling is going to be higher than K-State's. Once they get past Montana State, everybody else along the way, if you match it up, the ceiling is just going to be higher for them. Obviously, we know Kentucky is one of those teams with the way that they're loaded up on talent and the way that they should play. Kentucky would be one of those. And then obviously Marquette, just a better filled out roster. And the reason for that is Shaka Smart is there for his second year right now, as opposed to the first year for Jerome Tang. So even though we've talked about Jerome Tang has done a phenomenal job this year and getting this roster to this point, being a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament is never like an unimpressive performance. That's amplified when it's the very first year at a place and you only had 2 guys left from the previous roster, so you had to go completely from scratch. So what K-State's done has been really impressive, but as we've seen, there are limitations
Real quick
that come with the team.
And I don't want this to turn into a sidetrack conversation, but I want your opinion on this. And this is something that I've been thinking of here of late as the NCAA tournament comes around. Do you think that it's almost, if you were to be taking over a program, so let's say you're Jerome Tang entering your first year at Kansas State, or you're Dennis Gates in your first year at Mizzou, would you rather go into your first season and have to replace 11, 12 guys, or have a group of players returning from the previous regime, assuming the previous regime was let go because of a lack of success, not because of retirement, or it was time to move on because it was in the best interest of each group? Because I've started to kind of flip my idea here a little bit of, that maybe if you do it right, being able to bring in your entire group of guys that you want is actually better than having a whole bunch of returners, because there's a reason that the previous coach was fired more times than not. And most of the time that's because he was not succeeding with the players that he had. And if you look at what Kansas State did this year, if you look at what Mizzou did this year, those are just 2 easy options. Shaka Smart last year at Marquette made it to the NCAA tournament. I don't know how many players he had returning on last year's Marquette team. But I almost think it might be a little bit better in certain areas to actually be able to replace an entire roster as long as you do it correctly. If you look at like what was done at LSU this year, not done great, brought too many guys from Murray State, and there's a reason those kids are at Murray State, not playing in the Power 6, and that's no disrespect to those kids, though.
It's disrespect. It's okay to disrespect them.
What's your opinion on that, though?
No, look, I think that if you want to be in a position where you could possibly be what Jerome Tang and K-State are this year, just it doesn't even matter. The answer is you would rather bring in your own guys and kind of construct this thing.
Because I think Mizzou only had 1 guy back. Kobe Brown.
My point on it is that, like, when you do a roster like this, there are just going to be a lot of holes that, as much as you wish you could get fixed, and as much as you know what can be fixed, you're just going to have to play with them and deal with them this season. And that's kind of what we've seen with K-State, where Jerome Tang did the best that he could to fill this roster out. It was helpful that he kept Marquise Noel, and it was dynamite in finding and securing Keontae Johnson. And then from that point, how they were able to fill out the rest of the roster. They did enough to make this be a very good basketball team. The issue just comes into that they're too early in the process to actually get the guys that they truly want to 100% to fit. I always go back to the conversation we had probably about a month and a half ago, where we talked about how K-State wants to look like Baylor. That's the end goal. They will look a lot like Baylor in all likelihood. But They just don't have enough of the players to fully execute offensively right now. And actually, I think the one thing that we should give a lot of credit for is we talked about just a moment ago K-State's defense and how it stacks up in this region. The fact that K-State was able to this year defend at such a high level is a credit, and the offense eventually will come along and into that. And now there will be down years defensively, like we're seeing at Baylor right now. Like that's a pretty terrible defensive team that's there. But the team that won the national championship 2 years ago, they defended really well for especially the high level of offense that they played at. So I do think that you would rather start over with quite a few new guys, but that also doesn't guarantee that you're going to have success of any kind, because you're bringing a bunch of dudes in that don't know each other. You don't know how they're going to mesh. You don't ultimately know if they're going to work for you. So it's just as much of a risk, and it doesn't take anything at all away from the guys that do stuff with that. Like it's a hugely impressive feat. But yeah, like I don't think this K-State team would have been as successful if Jerome Tang had kept every single player from last year's roster on this team.
There's certainly a middle, right?
Yeah. I mean, like it would have been beneficial if K-State, now again, they didn't have guys that were quality enough ultimately to stick around on this roster. I think like Nigel Pack is the only guy that left that I'm sure Jerome Tang was beat up about, like losing that talent, because we know if Nigel Pack was on this team, K-State probably is able to withstand a few more games that they lost, and the ceiling is a little bit higher. But ultimately, there weren't many other guys. But there were probably some teams that when a new coach comes in, you look around and you say, I would have liked to have kept that guy and that guy and that guy and that guy. And there's, probably, 60% of what you thought a starting five could be that you wish would have stuck around.
Yeah, there's different viewpoints on it. I just have started to come around to the idea that, maybe if you get to remake an entire roster on your own and don't have to deal with some of the lingering effects of a previous staff and trying to have to fix some of the bad habits that maybe contributed to the previous coaching staff losing their way and not having as much success in the win-loss column as they probably would have liked. Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing, especially in this era of the transfer portal. And like I said, I mean, like Jerome Tang's not the only first-year coach to make it to the NCAA tournament having to remake an entire roster. I mean, Dennis Gates had to do the same thing at Mizzou, and they had damn near just as good of a year. Like they finished fourth in the SEC. K-State finished third in the Big 12, and obviously the Big 12 was superior to the SEC this year. But both of them are in the NCAA tournament. Both of them are, trending in the right direction as programs. So just not to get too sidetracked here, but that was kind of a thought that I've been stewing on here over the last couple of days of, maybe it was actually a good thing that Tang had to replace his entire roster and some ideas.
Another thing that I think is maybe another like feather in the cap of Jerome Tang and what he was able to do. The fact that Jerome Tang came from a program like Baylor to take this job is even different in what you can do. Like if you're Dennis Gates, who came from Cleveland State, where it's clearly a massive step up from where you were with like the connections you have. Like Dennis Gates was a head coach, Jerome Tang was an assistant, but like some of these guys, when they get a new job, you can bring guys with you essentially. I mean, we saw it. I mean, Shaheen Holloway had a guy or two from St. Peter's that followed him to Seton Hall this year. And for Dennis Gates, Jamoy Hodge ends up being the second leading scorer for Missouri this year. He averaged like 15 a game. Well, he played his first two seasons at Cleveland State with Dennis Gates, and he can elevate himself from the Horizon League to the SEC and to Missouri and all this and follow his coach. Jerome Tang doesn't have that luxury coming from Baylor in all likelihood, because
Adam Flackler is not leaving Baylor.
Where are you going to go? Like
Kansas State.
The only chance that really was out there this year was your boy Matt Meyer, Mr. Monster himself, who ended up in the portal at Illinois. And I mean, again, we in that situation, like he was in the portal before.
And there's a reason. There's a reason why Kansas State was not connected to Matt Meyer.
Yeah, exactly. So, like it's a little bit different there. And you talked about Matt McMahon. It didn't work out at LSU for him with all the Murray State guys, but he kind of felt like he already had, some dudes in the roster.
And I get what he was doing, right? Like Murray State's been really good. Like, I got that idea. Like they were really good last year again, if I remember correctly. And I do think the situation that he took over at LSU was maybe not more difficult than Kansas State, but maybe presented more unique challenges given some of the black eye and the stereotype that had been around LSU in the
Well,
last couple
and
of years.
they don't give a shit about basketball down there.
Well, I was just speaking more closely
Yeah,
towards.
I know. Yeah, and you're right. Like, but I'm just saying, like, they don't care about basketball down there either. So
Yeah, but I don't really think that players care that much about that when they're being recruited.
no, I think you're right. But like at the end of the day, like the
Sure,
interest
I'd
level
rather
and
go
everything
play.
else.
Sure, if I'm a 4-star transfer, if I'm a 4-star high school recruit, yeah, I'd rather go play in front of a packed crowd every single night. But
Yeah.
that's very low on my totem pole of priorities. Anyway, as we've kind of discussed the East here a little bit, and Mason, I haven't had an opportunity to really dive into the bracket yet as a whole, but I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on what teams you like, what teams you think have a good path to making it to the second weekend, the Elite Eight, the Final Four. From a holistic view, what teams do you think got a tough draw?
Yeah, I mean, looking around, I think of the teams that ended up with what I would consider a tough draw. I mean, Kansas is one that sticks out just from the standpoint of, like, I know you're a Kansas hater now. Like,
No. I was making that face because one of the teams that is opposite them is terrible.
Okay, well, easy there. I think you're trying to demean your own alma mater because
two quad one wins, baby.
you're
Let's
down on
ride.
them right now.
Two
Yeah.
quad one wins.
Here's
None
the thing,
since
though.
early December.
Like, we know what the heights of Arkansas and Illinois are. Like, that's a tough 8-9 matchup. And honestly, I'll throw this out there. I took a shot at them earlier in the show, but that's kind of similar in some ways to what Wichita State got in 2014 when they were a number 1 seed.
Yeah, except that team was undefeated.
Yeah, but the Missouri Valley.
Kansas, dude, they were undefeated. I don't care what conference you play in, you're undefeated.
If you played in that Missouri Valley, a Creightonless Missouri Valley,
dude, they were undefeated. That's impressive.
Nah, don't care. Doesn't matter. They were still the number 3 overall.
Long story short, though, I do agree that KU.
So here's the deal: like that Wichita State
KU's entire region is tough.
Yeah, as much as I make fun of that Wichita State team, and the fans are like, "Oh, they put Kentucky there. That wasn't right." Kentucky as an 8 seed is a tough draw if you're a number 1 seed. I don't care what happened during the regular season. And that Kentucky team ended up making it to the Final Four that year. And then you look around like Arkansas and Illinois. Arkansas has been weird this season. We got assistant coaches stripping phones away from reporters. We got Eric Musselman being a total weirdo. We've got players in and out of the lineup, like all this stuff. But at their peak, they were really awesome in Maui. And Illinois, at their peak, came back from however much it was in the final 3 minutes against Texas in the Jimmy V Classic earlier this year. And we know Illinois can hang with good teams. They have the talent. We know they can do it, Alec. I know
they
that
can do it. They can do it. But
I know that you're not wanting to give any credit. And you're Mr. Secret Scrimmage guy yourself, Illinois and Kansas.
They did not win. Illinois did not win that secret scrimmage. I don't know where this idea. This has been floating around here because Illinois has been projected on the 8-9 seed for a while. That Illinois, if they get Kansas, they beat Kansas in a secret scrimmage. No. They did not beat Kansas. They played multiple segments in a secret scrimmage, and they may have won 1 or 2 of
that's
the
impressive
segments
of
the secret scrimmage.
Hey,
they did not beat Kansas
all
in the secret scrimmage.
And then you look beyond that, the West is going to be difficult because UConn has been everybody's, most people's trendy pick of a 3 seed or lower to make it to the Final Four. They're the number 4 seed, and I think that they've got a rather easy draw here. I mean, Iona and then TCU, who is, they played well, but whatever.
I wouldn't want to have to go. I wouldn't want to have to know that I'm going to be outcoached in the first round, no matter.
Well, that's true.
You know what I mean? I wouldn't want to look across the sidelines and be like, well, I know I'm not. Well, I know the other guy's got an advantage here. And that's in respect to Dan Hurley, but the other guy on the sideline is arguably a top 5 college basketball coach of all time in Rick Pitino.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want that if I'm a UConn fan. Now they should win that game regardless, but I think that where you're going with this, with the West is where I sit as well.
Of the 13 seeds you look at, maybe Furman is the only other scary one just because of how they play, but Iona, because Rick Pitino is there, you are worried about him. Other teams don't, like St. Mary's and VCU. VCU won the A10. St. Mary's won the WCC. both solid teams. I wasn't as impressed watching VCU the last 2 days as I thought I might be. Either way, they won both of those games. They came back from down like 7 or 8 today against Dayton. It may have even gotten to 11 at one point. So they've come back and they can do a lot of things. Probably going to be a pretty low scoring game between St. Mary's and VCU. And then to the bottom of the bracket, Grand Canyon, they're going to get there. Bryce Drew is going to get knocked out in the first round, whatever, by Gonzaga. Northwestern, Boise State, not worried, whatever. But UCLA and Gonzaga being there, whatever happens, that's going to be scary for Kansas because UCLA, if Kansas gets there. But whoever does make it to that Elite Eight where they're playing Gonzaga or UCLA, like for UCLA, we know how good they can be. And even though that they battled through injury last night, like Arizona's a good team, but UCLA had everything going against them last night, and it took Arizona getting really lucky to win that game.
Yeah, so I'll take this.
And then real quick, let me throw in my Gonzaga thought. Think of all these years where we have thought Gonzaga to be a true contender and they've lost. It would be very on brand for them to put together their run this year. And anytime that you look around at what they have, like Strother and Bolton are still really good players to pair with Drew Timme, who would probably give Kansas some serious fits inside. I'd be fascinated to see how the Jayhawks tried to handle Drew Timme. So like this, the West is a brutal region for a lot of teams involved. And then throw into the mix the fact that Kansas got smacked in the face and they said, hey, you're not getting Kansas City for the Sweet 16 and Elite 8. We're shipping you out to Vegas.
They got smacked in their own backyard. So maybe
that's true. Maybe they don't want to play there. That's a great point.
Maybe they don't want to play at home anymore.
And honestly, like I get it. It sucks. But at the end of the day, like if you're a Kansas fan and your consolation prize is instead of playing in Kansas City where you've played all the freaking time, you get to go to Las Vegas. I'm not going to feel terrible for
also,
you.
like there's KU fans everywhere. Like,
yes.
Sure, be in Kansas City where there's more of them than anywhere else in terms of major metropolitan areas, but like there's KU fans everywhere. They will travel to wherever they play. Yes. They're like Kentucky. So whatever. Speaking about the West, though, I actually think this UCLA team is better than Kansas. And I particularly feel that way for sure when they have Jalen Clark and when they have Adeem Bona. Now, they're not going to have Jalen Clark by all reports at this point. He might have a torn Achilles tendon, which is just too bad because
I don't see him playing with that.
Yeah, no, you probably don't. And that's really too bad. Great player, especially on the defensive side. Really good mid-range game as well. Can step out and shoot it on the perimeter. But again, he's not going to play. Adeem Bona, though, he didn't play last night against Arizona due to a shoulder thing. And he's important to them. He's a freshman, potential first-round pick at some point in his career. Really good athlete, plays with some good physicality. But this is a UCLA team that I really, 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 really enjoy watching. Tiger Campbell maybe had a little bit of a disappointing season for the Bruins, but Jaime Jaquez Jr. is maybe one of my like 3 to 5 favorite players in the entire country to watch. I love him. I think that the West is a really fun region. There's a lot of teams that like you can kind of circle and say, I can see that team making a run. And I think you can see that more in the West than a lot of other regions that we look at. You talked about it with Arkansas, having 2 potential lottery picks with Nick Smith and Anthony Black. You talked about it with Illinois, even though I don't see my alma mater making it far. They do have some talent.
You can't discount them, though. You can't discount on those, what I'm saying. Like, they're a legit team.
Yeah, sure.
I know you will, but for a 9 seed, if that's the 9 seed you have to face, like you're concerned because they have a lot of guys that have played on really good teams. Like,
yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the other 9 seeds, like I think Illinois is better than Auburn. I think that Illinois is better than Florida Atlantic, or their ceiling is certainly higher than Florida Atlantic, and West Virginia is probably better. I mean, West Virginia is a top 30 Ken Pom team. But yeah, I think that the West in general is a region that I would keep my eye on to just see completely get blown up with teams dropping, or any team can kind of be able to make it out of that region. Another region that I kind of wanted to talk about, I actually really like Alabama's region for the Crimson Tide. And I particularly wanted the top half of the South region. I think that Alabama should feel really good about their chances to get to the Elite Eight. But the bottom of this region, I think, is awesome. Baylor, we know, can score a ton of points. We also know they don't guard. Creighton, we know they can score a ton of points. We also know they don't guard. Mizzou, they can shoot the lights out. They do not guard. Arizona can score better than just about anyone up there with Gonzaga. They also struggle defensively. The point potential of those bottom teams in the Southern region is awesome. And I hope that they all kind of make it to the round of 32 just so we get to see some games in like the 80s or the 90s, because I think those would be incredibly entertaining.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I look at the South and what it entails. Um, I mean, I think, just my rough quick look through. I think it's probably Bama and Creighton for a trip to the Final Four. And here's the problem: I have told myself over the last however many years that Nate Oates has been at Alabama, even though that I love the way they play basketball. Again, I only love Alabama basketball for the way they play basketball, nothing else. Make that clear. I will not pick them because I think it is a very volatile style of play, and I don't see any way they can string together enough games to make it happen. However, over the last couple of weeks watching them play, I think this team has a much more sustainable pace than what I've thought in past years for what they can ultimately do. And the reason for that is because just as crazy good as they are on offense, they are they're even better statistically speaking on defense. They have the third-rated KenPom defense in the country, which is important for them. And so then you throw together watching them play, and Brandon Miller was in foul trouble today for Alabama. It didn't matter against Texas A&M. And I mean, Nate Oates may be an idiot in a lot of areas of life, but basketball is not one of them. And this team,
It's awesome.
I mean, they are very good. And so
They're awesome.
as much as I've told myself, I'm
Did
not
you?
ever
How
going
closely
to.
did you watch his game? Just out of curiosity.
I was more heavily involved with VCU and Dayton, just because it was kind of out of hand early on. But I watched probably half of the game.
So yeah, I was kind of the same way where like they were up by a lot, and then I kind of flipped over to VCU at Dayton because it was closer. But from what I watched today of the Alabama Texas A&M game, I don't even feel like Alabama played that well offensively, and they still posted 82 points, and they still won by about 20. Like, I
Yeah.
freaking love this Alabama team. They're awesome. They play really good defense, like you said. We know the potential that they have offensively when they're making 3-point shots. But I also think this is a team that is really tough to beat when they don't shoot it well because of the defense and because they still get to the free throw line at a top 70 rate in the country. And they make their free throws at about a 72.5% rate, too. So I think that Bama's set up really well in their region. And then I think the bottom of the region is going to be really easy, really difficult to kind of sort through. I don't love this Baylor team. I think defensively, there's a lot of questions there. But again, like look at some of the teams they have to play against. There's not a lot of defense in that side of the region. I wouldn't be surprised if we end up getting Alabama and Arizona in the Elite Eight, and that would just be an awesome matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of good ones there. Arizona is going to be weird to me because there was a time like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I thought to myself, hey, I think I really like this Arizona team.
Mhm.
But then I thought about it more and it kind of scared me. And last night I really didn't like what I saw because everything was stacked in their favor. And it took, I mean, they had guys with off nights, but it took until the very final seconds of the game for them to kind of luck in a Courtney Ramey 3 and win that thing from UCLA. UCLA had every reason that they probably should have lost that game, and they had control for most of it. I came out of that game liking UCLA a lot more than I did going into it, and I feel a lot more concerned about what Arizona is actually. So I mean, I think it's going to come down to Creighton or Arizona for who faces Alabama. But I mean, as much as I've told myself, don't do it, don't trust Alabama. Alabama probably comes out of that region. The other interesting one is the Midwest. So Kansas doesn't get to go to Kansas City. Houston would be the team that got to. Texas also involved in that. They're the 2 seed there. I look at this, and Houston's going to be interesting to follow. That's going to be one of those that over the next couple of days, I think people, whether you're filling out brackets or just trying to determine in your head what you expect, what about Houston do you really like and will you latch onto? And do you trust that everybody that is going to be able to be out on the floor and keep themselves out there? I know Sasser dealt with the groin thing when he slipped yesterday, and then they lost to Memphis today. I just don't know that, like, of watching all this Memphis stuff, and dealing with them in the American. I think that they are a very good basketball team. I think they're deserving of what they got seed wise this year. Um, I just think that they're probably the they're the number one seed that is most likely to lose. Them and Kansas are in that mix there.
It's Kansas.
I just think the scary part about it is that you can look at what could happen if you face Miami in like the Elite Eight or the Sweet 16. Like Miami could shoot you out of there. You could have to face Indiana with Trace Jackson Davis, and Indiana at times when they have everybody else that can kind of step in. They can be really good. Now, we saw them have some weaknesses against Penn State on Saturday.
Penn State's such a unique matchup.
I know. In Penn State, I mean, they seemed out of it today against Purdue and then got right back in it and had a chance at the end. I ultimately don't think Houston comes out of this. And another team that I never trust in these situations is Texas, but I think Texas has a pretty favorable stretch here. I mean, I think they'll play Penn State in the second round, and I think Penn State could be scary for them. But outside of that, like, I'm not really too concerned about whoever it'll be out of the Sweet 16. Right now, again, this is just a quick look through and everything. I think it's going to be Indiana and Texas in the Elite Eight for a trip to the Final Four, which doesn't feel right. And like, neither of those teams do I actually see getting to the Final Four, but there are a lot of other teams here where I don't necessarily know how they can get it done. So, I mean, I think Indiana probably comes out of the Midwest. I don't know why I'm buying into them. I know I shouldn't. I know I absolutely shouldn't. But I am.
Real quick. I'm gonna tell you what. I'm gonna get you off this. What conference does Indiana play in?
They play in the Big Ten.
How many Big Ten teams have made it to the Final Four the last 2 years?
That would be, let's see, the last 2 years. Michigan, so 1. 0. Oh, Michigan lost in the Elite Eight.
There you go. That's why you don't bet on Indiana.
UCLA made it though.
But by that logic, I guess. I guess Texas and Oklahoma haven't made it super far of late.
Houston though, so that gives the Big 12 another one. Houston made it in 2021, so there you go. No, I don't know. I mean,
can you fault my arguments here?
No, those are great arguments with everything else that goes on. And we know like the Big Ten is kind of notorious the last couple of years for being underwhelming in the NCAA tournament. But I don't know. Like, I think the Midwest is probably the one that I could see the most volatility with. I think as crazy as the West will be and as up and down as it is, you can point to the West and say that there are four teams that we know are the only candidates to make the Final Four out of it. It's the top 4 seeds. It's going to be Kansas, UCLA, Gonzaga, or UConn that comes out of there, because I don't know that anybody else is all that worrisome. But I can go through the Midwest and I can tell you that I can make scenarios where Houston or Miami or Indiana or Xavier or Penn State or Texas can get there. And like, those are some longer shots, but it's because I don't, and maybe this is why I'm so concerned about my Elite Eight pick there. It's because there are so many teams that just aren't very trustworthy that will play. But if you look at the West, the teams at the top, even though like Kansas is probably the most vulnerable 1 seed, you can trust them a lot more in other situations, and you can be more trustworthy that one of these top 4 seeds will come through. I'm not so sure about the top however many seeds in the Midwest fitting that trustworthy bill that I would tag on them. Like Xavier is the 3. I've watched a lot of Xavier games this year where they do some really stupid things down the stretch. And
I mean, they've lost Fremantle and they haven't been the same team since losing Fremantle.
So I don't know. We'll see how it ends up playing out.
I could not disagree with you more than what you've said about Houston. Houston's been number 1 in KenPom for, I feel like, it's been months. And don't give me, not just you in particular, people are going to throw around, well, Houston doesn't play anyone because they play in the American line.
They don't. But
all right, that line is, I'm gonna curse here. You've done it at least once here. That line's bullshit.
Okay,
quite frankly. Is it bullshit that the American is bad? No, the American sucks. Is Houston losing to Memphis maybe a little bit of an eye raiser? Sure, if you want it to be. Houston lost 1 game in the regular season in the American. And if you want to use the argument that like oh, if you play in a bad conference, I'm not going to pick you to go to the Final Four. You're just a bozo, because Gonzaga's made it to 2 of the last 5 Final Fours playing in the WCC, which is as good / bad as the American has been. But Houston is better than, like, Houston's been number 1 in KenPom for months. They're significantly better than Iowa and Auburn. Iowa's going to get punched in the mouth in that game if they get past Auburn, and not even compete. Miami is potentially without Norchad Omier because he's been hurt recently. This is an Indiana program that has not made it to the Sweet 16. Well, none of these players have.
And
so good luck betting on that. No, this is the first time that anyone on this Indiana roster has finished above 8th in the Big Ten. And like, there's pieces on this IU roster I like. I really like Trey Jackson-Davis. I really like Jalen Hood-Schifino. But this is not like an IU group that I ultimately trust. They shot it better from the perimeter this season, but there's still guys who pass up shots from the perimeter. Miller Kopp needs to be shooting way more threes than he does. Tamar Bates doesn't give them enough. I don't think this is an Indiana team that, like, I get the intrigue with. I really do. And could I see them in a perfect world making it to Elite Eight, the Final Four? Yes. But that team is going to get punched in the mouth by Houston, and they're going to roll over.
So here's the deal. The weirdness.
I'm writing Houston they say when you fill out a bracket, the best way to do it is like pick your teams that are going to the Elite Eight, Final Four, and go from there. Like, Houston is getting sharpied to my Elite Eight immediately.
And then you have them playing Texas, I assume, since you're a Texas lover.
I don't know yet.
Okay.
I don't know about the bottom there.
Here's the thing.
Texas's guards can probably handle Jalen Pickett, but Jalen Pickett is such a tough matchup.
He's kind of inevitable at this point. Like, Texas, he's going to get his 20.
Texas A&M's good, man. Like, they've got a really good point guard, arguably the second best point guard in the SEC. His name is slipping my head right now.
Real quick, the other thing that I would point out, I think my favorite game that's going to come out of this region is going to be the first round matchup between Miami and Drake. I think that they're going to probably try and shoot the lights out of whatever location they are going to. Is that an Orlando one? I don't know exactly where that's headed. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll have more time to talk about this. Let's shift it back to the East real quick, where K-State sits in the East region, where we know that I think, like, it's a favorable draw. If you wanted to look at how this team could maybe make it to a Final Four, Purdue is the lowest ranked 1 seed by the committee. Purdue is scary for K-State and really for anybody because of Zach Edey. You don't really know how you're going to stop him. You just kind of hope.
You don't.
At one point today, Penn State, they committed 6 fouls in the first half, and all 6 of them were fouls on Zach Edey. Like, they fouled only Zach Edey in the first half. And that, whatever. Just try and get physical, hope it doesn't get called. But let's kind of like what I did with, the West, where I said, hey, there's a defined top 4 of who can actually make it to a Final Four out of this region. Everybody else, I'm not worried about making a Final Four run. If you had to rank the top 4 teams in order of who could make it to the Final Four out of the East region, I'll give you time to think about it since I'm throwing it at you right now.
I know my number 1 and my number 2.
No, I assume number 1 is Purdue.
No.
Okay. Who's your number 1? My number 1 would be Purdue.
My number 1 is Duke.
Oh, Jesus.
That was funny. My number 1 is Duke. They've been playing incredibly well as they enter the tournament. They should actually be on like a 14 or 15 game winning streak entering the tournament. If it wasn't for the stupid non-foul call at Virginia, their only other loss in that stretch was at Miami, where they got blitzed. But they won their last 6 games of the regular season, and they won 3 in a row in the ACC tournament. So they've won 9 in a row. This is a team that I think is 18-1 this season when they've been fully healthy. It's a team that is incredibly talented with Kyle Filipkowski, Derek Lively, Dariq Whitehead are all 3 really good players. Tyrese Proctor, someone who's potentially going to come out next year. Mark Mitchell is a talented freshman. He could give them a little bit more. And then they've got some good experienced guys coming off the bench with Jacob Grandison and Ryan Young as well. Yeah, Duke would be my number 1 team coming out of this team. Coming out of this region.
But here's the thing with they are playing very well right now. But let me tell you the teams that they have beaten in this 9-game winning streak that they're on. That started with that overtime loss at Virginia, which before that they got smoked by 22 against Miami. They beat Notre Dame, who has fired their head coach. They beat Syracuse, who has kind of fired their head coach. They beat Louisville, who should fire their head coach. They beat Virginia Tech, not a tournament team. NC State slides in as what they ended up as an 11, maybe.
Yeah.
And then North Carolina, who did not make the tournament.
Dude, they're the preseason number 1.
Yeah, let's give them their dues now. Then they beat Pitt, Miami, and Virginia, all 3 tournament teams in the ACC tournament.
And they handled all 3 of them.
Yeah, they handled Pitt. I mean, that Pitt win was probably the most impressive to me.
I mean, I thought what they did to Virginia was disgusting.
I mean, that's because Virginia's disgusting on offense.
Yeah, but Duke is also just really good defensively.
I agree. Duke is playing well right now. I just would not put them as the number 1 team to get out of this region. I think there are reasons to look around and pick somebody else other than them. I don't disagree that Duke should probably be in a top 4 when you discuss this region. But I still think that Purdue is probably the most deserving of being there.
Duke might not be my number 1, actually. It might be Marquette.
Oh, well, see,
Duke's 1 or 2, though. Duke is 1 or 2.
So you would put Purdue behind Duke and Marquette.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Both of their guards are freshman guards. They've struggled at times in tight games, clutch moments. And I do think that there's a potential that if they get a bad matchup in terms of being able to pull Edie away from the rim, and you maybe being able to kind of expose that a little bit, or if Edie were to get in foul trouble and they have to rely instead on Trey Kaufman-Renn. And there's certain players on this Purdue team who do have to be able to make shots for them to be really effective. So yeah, Duke would be my 1-2, Marquette would be my 1-2 along with Duke, and then Purdue would be my 3.
Okay. I would probably go, like I said, I'm going Purdue number 1.
I mean, I can't fault you for picking a 1 seed.
I would go Duke number 2, because if you look at that top half there, like you kind of segment these regions, nobody else totally alarms me and makes me think that they're capable of putting something together. I'm totally writing off Tennessee right now. I don't know. That's probably the right thing to do, but and maybe it's not fair. I don't care. Tennessee, not a worry to me. And then Memphis and Florida Atlantic, whatever, who cares? Memphis could get hot, could do something, not too worried about it. And then, I think the one that a lot of people are high on is Oral Roberts against Duke, and they'll probably pick that as a pretty trendy upset. But Oral Roberts getting Duke, it's not like they got St. Mary's or Miami or San Diego State, one of these other 5 seeds that seems like they're totally susceptible to it. Even though it could happen, I think Duke is of the status that they can handle that and everything. So the process for these teams getting late enough into the field makes sense that it would be Purdue and Duke at the top. And then I would probably put Marquette and K-State in some order in the final 2 spots of that top 4 in this region that I could see making it to the final 4. Just because, if you look around, part of this is about guaranteeing, can you get out of your first round matchup? And as much as Kentucky could get to a Sweet 16 or Elite 8, I'm not going to totally just say that they can't lose to Providence. Providence is a good team. They've got a great coach, a team that made a run last year in the NCAA tournament. There are a lot of things.
They didn't make a run, Mason. They were a top 4 seed, and they made it exactly where they were supposed to make it, regardless of what people thought about them.
Yeah, okay? I don't know.
There's a lot of people who just wrote them off. Not me. Not me. No. Providence was straight to the Sweet 16.
So I don't know. I mean, looking around at it, I would probably, in order, go Purdue. I'd go Purdue, Duke, Marquette, K-State is my 4 in order.
Yeah, I don't know who my 4th team is here.
I mean, I think it either has to be K-State or Kentucky. That has to.
I don't. It's not Kentucky for me.
Really? Okay. So then, where would you lean, USC as being
Michigan
USC or Michigan State?
But I don't really like Michigan State. I haven't liked this Michigan State team since before the season. But they've started to play well of late. I know they lost in the Big Ten tournament to a bad Ohio State team. That is an Ohio State team that does have some talent, even if Bryce Sensabaugh wasn't playing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I said earlier in the show I don't subscribe fully to the January, February Izzo BS line that our least favorite national college basketball reporter has coined. But there's reasons to like this Michigan State team. They have two good quality guards. Jaden Akins is a really good athlete as a third guard. Joey Hauser can make some shots. And then they've got some interesting pieces inside, led by Malik Hall. Mady Sissoko is fine inside, not going to kill you, I don't think. But yeah, USC is certainly interesting to me. If Boogie Ellis gets really, really hot, I could see him kind of getting them to the Sweet 16. The reason that I struggle to make it either the 7 seed Michigan State or 10 seed USC is just because I don't really see either of them getting past Marquette. But if one of them gets past Marquette, I could see them getting to the Final Four. I do think that there's a path for Kansas State to do it as well. And I think a potential matchup between Marquise Noel and Tyler Kolek in the Sweet 16 would just be bonkers fun.
Yeah, that would be fun. I think that's why I throw those two in there is because that one is just a lot more individually based in terms of like a game by game basis where like anything could kind of happen there. You just got to get through that game and then move to the next. Whereas I do think that there are some opportunities in like the upper region where it's just more of like a set deal. You know who's going to make it through. Whereas in the bottom half, like Kentucky, K-State, Providence, we'll throw them in there. Michigan State, USC, Marquette, any of those teams, if things fall their way, like you could make the case and see them being in the mix of being a team that faces Purdue or Duke in the Elite Eight. So it'll be interesting to see. And I think it's kind of fun to follow along with these teams here. And it's a unique draw that K-State has with who all that they could possibly see. But it is, quite a bit of fun to see what could end up playing out there. And then you look around like at the other 3 seeds. Would you take a different draw from the 3 seed side and not just considering like what the 14 seed looks like? Because I don't know that matters as much. And we talked about, it couldn't theoretically happen because TCU and Iowa State are other 6 seeds. But of the 6 seeds out there, it's Creighton, it's Kentucky, it's Iowa State, and it's TCU. Where would Kentucky rank on that list if like you're a 3 seed and you say, this is the 6 we want to see? Where's Kentucky at? Are they probably, Creighton's the one that you would least like to see. I think we understand. Iowa State is probably next on that list right now. Or not Iowa State next on that list. They're probably at the bottom of like the
honestly
talent level.
You can sign me up to see all of these teams except Creighton.
Okay.
I wouldn't be particularly scared if I was a 3 seed of having to play 6-seeded TCU, 6-seeded Iowa State, or 6-seeded Kentucky, to be completely honest with you. Yeah. And this is where,
they're all flawed.
Yeah. Well, this is where I've said all year that I just think everyone in college basketball sucks this year. And I think you really kind of see it when looking at the 6 seed because none of those 6 seeds are particularly scary.
Well, I think you look at the 6 seeds.
And I feel like Creighton,
3
like
of them
you said earlier. So here's my thing with the NCAA tournament in this time of the year. So much of as we lead up to the NCAA tournament is what can they do? Like what hypothetically can this team accomplish? But in reality, once you get to this time of the year, it's more so what have you actually done for me to like really buy stock into you. And Creighton is a team that it's like in my head, I'm like, okay, preseason top 10 team. They played really well out in Maui. I've seen them play with Ryan Kalkbrenner. They're really good there. He's one of the best shot blockers in the country, one of the best defensive bigs in the entire country. Kalkbrenner is. But then again, there's a reason you're a 6 seed. So
yeah,
there's a reason to doubt Creighton.
I think with the 6 seeds out there, Creighton, TCU, Kentucky underachieved this year. Iowa State as a 6 seed, based off of what you look around and what they've done and everything that's gone on, they've probably overachieved a little bit with what's gone on. And they're all 6 seeds for a reason. Like typically most 6 seeds, you don't go like, hey, that they're in the right spot. They maximize what they could do this season. Like Iowa State's probably the only one. The others, they're 6 seeds by kind of default of we saw them at some really good peaks, like TCU blowing out Kansas and Allen Fieldhouse. That's the peak of TCU. But we've also seen them at some pretty low lows and not be able to put anything together. And that's why TCU finished 9-9 in the Big 12 again. Creighton, preseason top 5, they drop all the way down. And then we started to see them rise back up. Like it's just one of those things that the way everything ended up playing out, like those teams found where they were supposed to be, but they weren't at their peak, at least 3 of them. And that's why, I mean, it's concerning what you could see from a matchup standpoint with Kentucky if you're K-State, because of Sheboy and because of the talent that's littered throughout the roster. But at the end of the day, there is a reason why Kentucky is in this NCAA tournament as a 6 seed, and why K-State, if you go by any of the metrics out there, is better than Kentucky. It's because if you look at what Kentucky did this year, they have losses on their resume to South Carolina, to Vanderbilt, to Georgia, to an Arkansas team that was struggling at the time. And they actually have 2 losses to Vanderbilt on their schedule. Like, they have underachieved at certain steps, and they've had some struggles. So it all ultimately works out. And I think the one thing that you should feel good about if you're K-State going into this is there aren't a ton of teams in your region that you look at and say, well, I don't see a path to beating them. And I know that's kind of how everything plays out. Like, you can create a scenario in your head where you could beat anybody, but it's, I think, a realistic thing to say with the way that this shapes up for K-State, where like you can easily see a scenario where they beat Kentucky, mainly because K-State beat Kentucky in the NCAA tournament 5 years ago. Like, K-State can slay that dragon. There's no worry there. Marquette, you can make the case, and you can see why K-State could beat Marquette, because Marquette's kind of in the same spot as K-State. Marquette overachieved for what was expected of them this year. Marquette was picked to finish 9th in the Big East preseason standings. They ended up winning the whole thing. They had a little less stiff competition than K-State, but the Big East, very, very good this year. So they were a line above K-State as a 2. And then everybody else, like you can see it. You can make the cases there. And I think that's the one benefit you have as K-State, because if you look around in some other spots, I like it. If I'm Xavier, you're really hoping to get lucky here, because I have a tough time picturing Xavier in my head as they're constructed right now, beating Texas, beating Indiana, beating Houston, whoever you throw at Xavier once you get past that second round. I think you have a tough time moving on. And if you're Baylor, like, I don't think Baylor is going to be able to beat Creighton or Arizona the way that they're playing right now. I'm kind of out on Baylor doing anything special this season, especially after seeing them another time in Kansas City against Iowa State. Like, they have to hit a ton of shots, and they did that early on with Jalen Bridges, and then eventually it all just kind of went away, and they're not good enough defensively right now. So K-State's in a good spot from that standpoint, where they are in a region where it's realistic, where you can say, you play them, I can see a win. Purdue is the one that seems like the biggest stretch to me, but they at least have a chance there. And I could see how K-State could get it done against Purdue. It would just take K-State probably playing their best game of the season, which ultimately is what you need come March, unless you're going to get lucky and somebody else plays their best game of the season for you, aka UMBC, who beat Virginia, and then you get to play a 16 seed. Then you don't necessarily need your best game to go out and beat them.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this interesting for K-State is there's reasons to be confident within their region, particularly the bottom half, that they can make it to the second weekend, because Kentucky hasn't been able to string together long stretches of high levels of play this season. Providence is limping into this event. And if you can get past Montana State, like, there's an opportunity for you to make it to New York and play at Madison Square Garden. And if you get that opportunity, that's something you're certainly going to relish the opportunity of. And at that point, once you make it to the second weekend, I think anything can kind of happen.
Yep. No, for sure. That'll do it for us. We will be back on Wednesday and get ready to have more pre-tournament coverage. Go a lot more in depth on Montana State, the first round matchup. Give us some time to get prepped on the Big Sky champions and what K-State has to face there. Also have some more fully fledged things decided as we get more time to fully digest what's going to go on with this NCAA tournament. But we'll have plenty of time to kind of go over that. Just kind of fun to get out of the way tonight, get a quick look at it and the initial thoughts on everything that's going to play out here. It's just fun to have K-State back in the NCAA tournament. Again, it's been 4 years since their name popped up on Selection Sunday. It was 3 non-competitive seasons sandwiched in between that 2019 tournament appearance and the Wildcats looking to get a good taste of March Madness this time, as opposed to what happened in 2019. So that will do it for Alec and I. The last question I have of you today, just off the top of your head right now, you can change your pick later, but as it stands right now, who's your national champion?
Alabama.
All right. Well, I'm in the same boat as you, and I hate that I am sitting in that boat because you could put a lot of holes in that boat right now, and it could easily sink. But I do think
putting holes in there with.
Well, I about said a certain line, but you can't do that with Alabama. So we'll Greg Gumbel style sidestep that and have plenty of Cats coverage coming for you in the coming days. So Wednesday we'll have another full-blown podcast, and then we'll be getting prepped for everything else that will come the way of K-State. They'll have their media availability in Greensboro on Thursday. Open practice will be at 2:45 p.m. Eastern in Greensboro for the Wildcats. And so we'll have coverage from the Wildcats once they actually get to Greensboro and everything else that'll play there with the games and everything to follow. So stick in with EMA Online, and we'll have you covered throughout the NCAA tournament, everything else coming on. Some football recruiting updates up on the site that are there now, also coming in the next couple of days. And if you're not signed up right now, first, be sure to subscribe to the EMA Online YouTube page and the podcast feeds. But also, if you want to get subscribed to the website or you want to check it out, use code EMA30 right now at sign up for your first 30 days free of EMA Online. It will definitely be worth it for you, especially this time of the year where you're going to want all the content that you can get from the NCAA tournament and elsewhere. So that will do it for Alec and I as we are out, and we appreciate everybody tuning in tonight live. And if you're listening back to this, we appreciate that as well. And we'll talk to you again soon with EMA Online.